And here we are live. I'm Conrad, and I'm joined by my friends Gunnar and Ella.
Hello.
And let's jump right in. So we haven't done that before. So we're using this session in a way to test if this kind of like office hours are useful. So please tell us in the chat at the end of that how useful, and if it was useful for you, how we should be doing it differently. It's kind of a complete test balloon. We don't know if it's even a good idea. Maybe you'll all be like, oh my God, we just wasted an hour that we could have used to recuperate from all the heavy learning at
Well,
Neuromatch.
hopefully not.
So let's jump right in. We will take the questions essentially in the order of the votes that you have. So I need everyone who's here right now, please look through the questions and upvote at least 3 of them. Everyone here, go and vote. So why don't we start with a question by Chris? Chris asks, and please, when you ask questions, add to the question if you'd be fine coming on screen or not. We'd love if people that want to go on screen, if you ask your question in person. Otherwise, we will be asking them on your behalf. And so we'll start with that question by Chris, who asks, what's the progress of computational neuroscience, in particular the theoretical field, in psychiatric disorders such as depression and anxiety? Is there any paper-related and introduction materials? So who should take that question?
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
Mostly because it's not my field. But the short answer is yes. There's definitely a computational psychiatry is a thing. It's actually quite hot, I would say, right now. A lot of people want to get into it. I'm not quite sure to what degree the field has, been revolutionary yet. But it's a very young field in a certain way. And there's definitely lots of interest and lots of potential.
Yeah, so let me plug some of the work that I really like in that area. So one of the young great people in that area is Quentin Hoyes, who's been writing a lot of papers. And let me give you a little bit of the flavor of how computational psychiatry papers often are. So what people often do is they take a model that we have about brains. For example, maybe a model that says the brain is doing something like Bayesian statistics. And then they ask if we take these models and we introduce ways how these models are slightly wrong. Say, maybe you have a Bayesian model of brain computation. You say, well, what if it's wrong at what we believe from before versus what we currently learn? And in that case, you could say maybe schizophrenia is just a way of like you take new information and you don't weigh it enough. So basically, the world's data supports one interpretation of the universe, but you're just so certain that it doesn't matter. So there exists a lot of work in that space where you can then learn helplessness as another area where there's strong models that people had. So they use basically models of the brain as a way of like figuring out how things could go wrong. And yes, Gunnar said it's a thriving paper, thriving field with apparently a book already.
Yeah, this is by Peggy Series, by the way.
Oh, by Peggy Series, yes. Oh yeah, she is like a super cool rising star in the Bayesian modeling field. Very, very cool papers. Very solid psychophysics. I believe she's also a world-class cyclist. This is something that no one ever talks about. That a lot of the cool people in the field, they have like very different things that they're doing. Gunnar, what are you doing when you're not writing cool motivational papers?
Oh God, you're gonna sidetrack this conversation.
I'm sorry. It's we're trying something new.
Lots of people know that I like brewing beer, and I like gardening, and I do a little bit of painting and woodworking. So yeah.
And what about you, Ella?
Oh, I like kayaking a lot. There's some really nice rivers to kayak on around Boston. and read a lot of non-science related books, specifically non-science related. And yeah, baking as well. Although my oven is like from the 70s right now, so I'm doing that a little less.
That must be a good challenge. So why don't we go to the next question before I derail our discussion any further? So Ursula Baranowska asks, any tips on how to start a career in neuroscience or science in general for students / those who are still at the very early stages of their career? Or maybe the opposite, what to avoid and what is less important?
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking early career as in undergraduates, I think it's just important to try out research and see if you like it. It's something that you can't fully appreciate until you do it, I think. So if there's opportunities at your university or summer programs or through Neuromatch doing your projects, I think it's great to try that out. Something to avoid, I talk to a lot of students who are applying for PhD programs and they're really stressed because they don't think their interests are specific enough. And then they tell me their interests and it's like so much more specific than my interests ever have been. So I wouldn't worry too much about like committing to one area of neuroscience for the rest of your life. Like the whole point of grad school and even beyond that is you explore and you try out different interests. So and a lot of people, if you go to grad school, in some countries you do rotations, you might end up in a totally different lab than you expected. So yeah, I think that kind of sums it up.
Yeah, so I would say try to get a solid foundation. It's very hard for most people to sort of learn math or physics or chemistry or microbiology maybe after the fact, because it's like a different way of thinking in a certain way. It's often easier to learn a little bit of biology later on if you have the foundations. And the other thing is, don't forget that you're in grad school. If you're going to grad school, a lot of like students or trainees have sort of like publication and research output in mind, but it really is you're there as a trainee and you're supposed to learn by definition. And then finally, just follow your heart. I know there's lots of stuff gets hyped up momentarily, and then it'll die back down, the hype. And something else gets hyped up. And the best thing you can do to sort of maximize your success, I think, is being enthusiastic, being motivated, and what better than to follow your heart and do what you love doing.
Yeah, and let me add a little to that is just strategic. So a problem that a lot of you will run into is that basically you will want to apply to, let's say, do a master's thesis or a rotation or maybe a PhD thesis with someone. And the problem is that the people that you'd be interested, they will probably have applications from a lot of other people as well. So one of the things that's actually related to Gunnar's, like, find what you love. And like, I think I just very slightly disagree with Allah there. Although, like, I get it. Like I wasn't like that focused either. But one thing that's very good for applications is to try and be specialized. So if a professor that has like so many applications get another one, like, I have good grades, my name is X, I'm at University Y, look at all the things that I've done there, that doesn't answer the question of the fit. And ultimately the goal of that system is to kind of find, not like the professors want to find the people who really will be excited about the work they do, and the students want to find the professors who they be excited about the work. So it's a matching problem. So one thing that often works really well, and that is to basically have like these hyper targeted applications. So the way I always explain it to people is the following. Let's say I want to work with Gunnar. What will I do? I'm going to read like Gunnar's most recent like 5 papers or so. And then I will be like, oh, I think I start understanding who Gunnar is. And then I put myself into Gunnar's shoes. If I was Gunnar, what is the next experiment that I want to run? And I will basically propose, or maybe the next theory that Gunnar wants to develop. And I will then then write a super targeted email, which is basically, dear Gunnar, I've been reading your papers, which every student ever will say, but then you say, and I think the following project would be something that would be really a good match for my interest. And I basically propose to Gunnar what his next paper will be. If you're right at guessing what Gunnar's next paper will be, and Gunnar at all has money to fund people, it's very likely that Gunnar will like want to talk with you and like really understand that. So this like choose a smaller number of people, but really figure out what in their logic, the future, how that looks like, where we're going, is often remarkably successful. And that leads to very short emails. It's basically, hey Gunnar, not like, dear Dr. So-and-so, my name is so-and-so, and here's my CV and basically a page of stuff. No, like just say, dear Gunnar, I've been thinking about your research and I've been thinking about my interest. This is what I think would be wonderful to do. Is there the chance to do something like that in your lab? Keep it short, but basically by doing that, prove that you actually understand how the lab ticks. And I find that is often very, very successful. No? Like how would you two, Gunnar and Ella, how would you approach it?
I think it depends very much on what career stage and opportunities we're talking about and the country, right? Because in the US, for example, for PhD programs, you're often not going there for one professor. And in fact, that can be a bad thing if you are, because they might not have room in your lab. You go there like through the program. But I agree with you, especially at later stages like postdocs and maybe in other countries where the PhD is a little bit more straight into a lab, that approach makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Yeah, and
I still think people should be open to exploring new interests at future stages. You know, you don't have to lock in when you're 20 to what you want to study for life.
But individual, hold on, like what Ella mentioned is something that not everyone here in the audience may know, which is there exist 2 kinds of different departments. There exists a department where the application goes like this. You apply to the program, which is just like a standardized America-wide program mechanism. You pay some fee to even apply. And if I remember that right, and then the department will choose. There's other departments where the professor will choose, where you apply to a professor and then basically the professor says, I want that person. How can you know that? Almost all departments that are of the first type, they have a rotation program in the first year where you don't commit to someone, but you'll go through different professors. Almost all the departments that are of the second kind don't have a rotation. And it also depends slightly on the field. So if you apply for a neuro program, they often have these rotations. If you apply for, say, a computer science department, they almost never have. And then there's exception departments. But even in those departments, if you have a professor who really wants you, they can often like put their finger a little on the scales. So, but yes, the application, of course, and Allah is of course right about that, to the university will say, this is why your department is a good fit to my interests. Any other advice?
I mean, we can talk about this topic for an hour, but I think we should
easily. Okay.
There's a lot of advice, and if you look it up, there's quite a bit actually on, for example, Twitter. Advice on, you know, how to apply to graduate schools, how to approach people best, like, you know, what information to include or not, and all this kind of stuff. So there's lots of details and there's lots of information out there that would help you with that as well.
Well, also, I mean, tomorrow we can touch on some of these subjects, but tomorrow we are having our Comp Neuro industry Prof Dev panels, so definitely go to those. And next week there'll be Prof Dev academia panels, so there'll be more opportunity to hear from more people from us also.
Great. So let me just wrap briefly Ryan's question. So Ryan Galston asked, any advice for approaching labs to request to do research under? I'm heading into a Master of Science program to learn the research process, but find it hard to think of ways to extend potential PI's recent work, partially due to a deficit of contextual knowledge. How do I push past this block, find a mentor, and publish? So that's a version of the question that we just talked about. Any additional advice for Ryan?
So I think it depends a little bit on each individual situation. If you're already at a university and you're sort of flexible at what you want to do, have some ideas. What I would recommend doing is pick out sort of like your top 5 or whatever professors and try to talk to them directly. That's probably the best you can do. And a lot of people I know will look for your enthusiasm much more. In particular, if you haven't done any particular research yet, or you're not very advanced in your studies yet, that's sort of like a big, to me at least, it's a big indicator of potential success and match.
But maybe we should talk a little about like how one gets to that situation where one can like understand a research program. And the first thing is, Ella told us she's reading lots of books. I find it shocking that I often interview students and I ask, so you say you're into, what do I know, computational psychiatry. What's your favorite book in that area? And they're like, yeah, I never read a book. And then like, okay, like it's part of neuroscience. You must have read a book on neuroscience. And they're like, no. Then which papers did you read? Like, I don't know. Like I looked at one, like, no, like reading is like a big part of getting there. Like read a popular book. No, it doesn't need to be a specialized book. I'm into causality. Read the book of why. It's super useful if you want to make your way into causality, because you get an intuition for that. And you can start with books that are more popular and then make your way towards more specialist books. But reading a lot is like, yes, like you should read a book about something before deciding that you want to do your PhD in that area.
And actually, I'll take this opportunity to plug a Neuromatch friend's book. Grace Merrill published a book on models of the mind, which is excellent and covers computational neuroscience models. So
there it is.
Strongly recommend that book.
Wonderful. Cool. Let's go to the next question. I think we are on career panel right now. What are the ideal career options for a computational neuroscientist, or simply put, can you earn well with a background in computational neuroscience?
Yeah, I mean, again, come to our industry panel tomorrow, but I think there are a lot of options in academia and maybe, more well-paid outside of academia potentially. But you learn a lot of skills that can lead to going into data science, machine learning research, and also computational neuroscience itself. I think there's more and more companies, and especially startups, that are pretty doing actual computational neuroscience work.
So let's break down salaries. No, it was a question about how much money you make. Let's put some numbers on the table. No, like I'm gonna give you like the US numbers. It's slightly different across countries, but let's just put the numbers on the table. Doing a PhD, you'll make about $30,000 a year because it's mostly considered a training endeavor. Doing a postdoc, you'll make like $60,000 per year. Be professor, entry level, you'll make about $110,000 a year. Again, like always plus minus a little bit depending on the field. Be a senior old professor, you might make like 50% more or something. So you're not getting rich on the professor track. Start at like a big tech company as a newly minted PhD student. You're gonna make like $100,000, $200,000 in that range. Maxed out Google engineer, you're gonna make like about $1.5 million in terms of like in terms of shares and other things. No, I'm trying to like put like as best as I can. Not like, and this is just like, I'm just talking about like rumors, stuff that I heard people talk about. A lot of
I think starting salaries in industry are not quite as high. Like 100,000, I think is a good number. I wouldn't go to 200 typically for someone coming out of a PhD, but that can like go up like rapidly. Like I've seen one of my students essentially having their salary tripled after like 2 years in a job because they performed well, and there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that some starting salaries after a PhD are that high if you're doing machine learning research at like Google and Facebook and some of the big companies. I've heard salaries that are 200K.
So, and then the question was a little, can you like really make a lot of money? Like, yes, there's people who've done startup companies who've gotten insanely rich and started out as computational neuroscientists. No, it depends on where you see yourself. But like evidence is that you need to make like 75,000 to like live like happily. Like, I mean, like the money translating to quality of life curve, like gets to be pretty flat as you get into the higher ranges. So in any case, like, yes, you can live very well as a computational neuroscientist, and you can even live really well as like an academic computational neuroscientist. I hope I speak for my colleagues here as well. Like we are enjoying life quite a bit.
Yeah. So maybe just one addition in terms of sort of like job market broadly. When I teach to our incoming neuroscience student potential career options, and this is of course not just comp neuro, this is all of neuroscience. It ranges from anywhere from working in pharmaceutical companies to the film industry, to law, to government, etc., etc. And like think about animation studios wanting to get the movements right, and you need a movement scientist, someone that can do the modeling, because somehow these characters have to move correctly, right? And what better than to put an actual generative model behind, etc., etc. So there's a huge breadth of job opportunities out there. My recommendation is be open-minded, and if you have special interests, right, in whatever that is, see if you can get a job in that area.
And talking about that, and Disney is paying top dollars for people who are really good at getting the movements right.
Yep.
And that is most certainly industry salaries. Why don't we move on to the next question? We will not get through all questions. We were really worried that we wouldn't get any questions and that we'd get very bored very quickly, but we have plenty of them. Next question. I want to also say another thing now. Everyone who's in here, like, vote on the questions, like right now. Like, just vote on your favorite 3 questions right now, because we will run out of questions, and then you will regret not having voted for the right questions.
I just want to add one thing to the careers discussion. We're talking about industry versus academia, and we probably think of academia as like becoming a professor, but there are a lot of other options besides those two. Like, I'm not a professor, I'm a like teaching faculty, and I get to teach, and I get to do Neuromatch, and I get to like organize educational programs. So there's like educational things you can go into. Friends of mine have gone into government, like there's science writing, there's not just these 2 options, which I think because they're the most popular options, we sometimes like present that as a binary, but there's a lot that you can do.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Like, the specialization is advancing, and I think there's going to be a lot of positions that are not traditionally either prof or not academia. There's going to be a lot of academic people who are not on that traditional track, and there's progressively also industry people that are not really quite on the industry track. Not like you can be at Google DeepMind and actually, or Microsoft Research, and actually very much do cool research, and you'll get like maybe a little more than academic salary, but not crazy rates. Towards that's progressively a whole continuum. Now here's the next question. It's a question by Ikhwan John, I think. I apologize for probably mispronouncing it quite badly, who asks, how do I survive in the flood of knowledge? Hooray, Neuromatch. It is a flood of knowledge. Research topics, methodology of too much possibilities to choose a specific one. Is there any systematic way, especially with respect to the limited amount of time, all the scales and components and in neuroscience look like they're combinable?
So the good news is that you will learn some of how to do that during the academy in the projects, specifically to project guidance. So I'm not going to rehash everything, but practically the way this works is you should always start with a question. And then there is going to be, once you start digging a bit, there's going to be a limited number of ways that you think would be good to approach that question. And then there will be additional constraints. So usually, like your PI or whoever you're working with might say, no, I have a preference for this versus this, or we don't have money to do this because that costs millions of dollars and we can't do that, or whatever it is. Or maybe there's some particular applications you're looking for and certain approaches can help with that, certain others cannot. Maybe there's a skill set you want to learn that will guide that a little bit. There's a million of potential sort of like factors there. Ultimately, I agree. If you look sort of like at neuroscience at large and even comp neurologist, there's like an infinite number of ways you can, like methods and modeling approaches and things like that. But ultimately, once you sort of like have something specific in mind in terms of the question you want to answer, you work in a lab, in a particular field, the choices are not that huge typically.
Yes, but I want to emphasize another thing as well. Like, you're drinking from the fire hose now, not like we're basically teaching you within 3 weeks, basically the entire canon of computational neuroscience, a significant part of data science, some machine learning, all those things in a crazy short period of time. You will not understand all of them deeply in the time that you have. And in fact, if you do a PhD thesis, by the end of your 5-year PhD thesis, America has 5 years. Europe tends to be a little shorter. I don't know where Canada stands.
In the middle of
They're in the middle?
In the middle. So right? It's like Europe typically has about 3 or so. Canada has 4. So
yeah, America.
We're a compromising nation. Sorry.
So basically, even in that period of time, you're still drinking from the fire hose. There's still no way of having the overview of everything. And then once you become tenured professor, you still don't have the overview of everything. So you never get there, and that fire hose never ends.
And that's part of the exciting job that we have, actually, the constant learning and the sort of like pleasure that comes with constantly learning new things.
Oh, cool. So let's take Rami's question next. What are the hot areas in neuroscience, vital problems in the field, and the problems of the computational neuroscience for it? Which is funny because Harman said, I want to do science without having to follow the system. And this question is, what is the system? So Gunnar, Ella, tell me what's hot in neuroscience.
Oh boy, I'm not sure I want to answer this. I don't okay, so this is not a judgment, obviously. My personal approach to science is I don't follow trends. I do my own thing. Because trends are, well, I don't know. I just don't. I follow my own interests. There's many reasons why. I don't necessarily want to get into them too much. So I feel uncomfortable commenting about it. Let's say it that way.
What are the areas you're most excited about, even if they're not, following the trend?
So let's actually turn that question around, because I think all three of us view it view it in the way that this is that you're asked that I think we don't agree with your question. I mean, like I saw like Ella like twitch a little bit. I think so. Neuroscience has bubbles. There's areas where all of a sudden you have something that is hot. The problem with the existence of things that are hot is that lots of good computational neuroscientists move there. By the time you're through your education, the thing that was hot is no longer hot. What's worse is it's no longer hot, but it has trained hundreds of PhD students in the same thing. So you allowed the system to make you into like a commodity. Now, if you're in an area where there's lots of people that are just like you, the only way to get it right is by being the best person in that whole group. And I was never the best person at anything. I always move to new things so that I don't have to be the best person at something. And so this following the things that are hot is like, I think, a really bad career move that I want to discourage everyone from doing. So successful careers, if I look around me, often don't happen at that place where there's something hot, but happen at places where people make those new connections. No, and like
or fill important gaps that no one else has noticed.
That's right. No, like, and all three of us are like in what we do, we're doing quite well. And we are all kind of in like those weird spaces. I mean, like, I'm not sure if I can like meaningfully summarize where Ella and Gunnar sits, but like Ella, for example, in my view, sits at a unique space kind of combining comp neuro with education. Gunnar is sitting in a unique place kind of combining like computational techniques with modern computational techniques with like motor control. I think I sit currently at a unique place kind of combining causality with computational neuroscience. So all these like all the things that are really in the end hot come from making unique links. So if you try and chase the bubbles right now I can give you a set of bubbles, but I want you to take this as a warning, not as something where we should strive. Do you two agree?
Yep.
Yeah. And I think we've seen, just a concrete example of that, like deep learning is obviously amazing. Like we're teaching a whole course on that. But I think that there was a sort of trend of everyone rushing to learn deep learning, and talking about in general, not just in neuroscience. And then it turned out that to do deep learning well, you really also need the domain knowledge in the thing that you're doing deep learning in, right? So like doing deep learning in neuroscience, you still need to know neuroscience. And so you need that unique intersection. And so I think that kind of goes directly to show like what Conrad was just saying, that it's at these intersections that I think especially interesting things can happen. And so it's good to, not just go with the one trend that's out there.
So let's not go down that route, but like I could give you a list of what I believe to be current bubbles that hopefully will die very soon. But let's take the next question. So this is a question by Amma Marvi, who asked, what would a successful PhD student look like in one of your labs? I.e., what skills should they work on to make them well equipped for grad school in Comp Neuro?
I think I've already answered that question a certain way. The number one skill you got to bring in is enthusiasm. And of course, like, if you've made it that far with, maybe a little bit of research experience, potentially not necessarily required, but sometimes helps, mostly for you as a trainee to really know whether you want to engage in this, if the research is for you or not. And supposing that, your marks are not terrible, although marks are not a great predictor, but, there's only so much we have to go with. That's my number one requirement, and your willingness to learn. because that's what you will have to do. Like the firehouse hose will be maybe not quite as intense as doing Neuromatch, but there'll be a steep learning curve. And a successful student is a student that I can see evolve. That's to me an successful student. If a student comes in, it's like, top of the class, like maybe has already a publication, whatever it is, like, like sort of looks exceptional on the CV. And then over the 4 year of a PhD, they're just flatlining. In the end, they will end their PhD and everyone else in their cohort will have overtaken them, right? In terms of performance. That's not a good student. I'd rather have a student that comes in with a B average, for example, just to put some words on it. Yeah, I was the same thing.
I was bad as an undergraduate.
Yeah. So and then they might take a while, but then take off. And that's also as a mentor, that's one of the most rewarding things ever. And that's, to me, it's success. It's like, go from here to here. And by the way, this is what Neuromatch is about. Regardless of where your current here is, whether it's there or there, what we want to see is the increment. We do not want to see you all end up here, because you can't. This is impossible. If you start down here, you can't. We want to see the increment, right? And I think that's true for grad school.
So but I think there's a little more that I think we can say about this, which is there exist very different labs. So there exist some students, they basically, by the time they are even applying for PhD students, they kind of have discovered this thing that they love. They might not know who the right supervisor is for that, but they have this thing that like that they really want to do. And what they then need is a supervisor that helps them fine-tune what they do, maybe help them write the papers more efficiently, maybe help them network, things like that. And there's other students who haven't yet found where they want to be. And I believe these two classes of students, they have there's different supervisors that they match well. And if you join a big, very famous lab, the supervisor will have no time for you. That can be a great thing or a horrible thing. It could be that you just want to do your own thing and you want to be funded for that. And you want to have the tools that a great lab will give you. It could also be that it's the worst thing ever, which is you actually need someone to teach you, to help you think through the field and help you acquire the skills there, in which case you'd be much better off having not that super famous big shot professor. So there's a continuum and people move between that, and the sizes of labs evolve over time. So it's basically what is good. I'm good now for different students than what I would have been when I started. I was really good at helping people kind of discover what they wanted to do. Now it's more like I'm a good coach for students who already know what they want to do. So there is something that I think we can say about this matching process.
Yeah, personality match, I think, is also an important factor. If I don't like working with you and vice versa, it's not going to work. It might work, but it's not going to be ideal, and it's not going to be as pleasurable as it should be, right?
What determines if someone is a good personality match for you?
Well, I don't know. But this is the kind of stuff that you figure out when you meet people, right? This is why you actually have an interview and things like that. And arguably, I would say that part of the success of Neuromatch is that we all get along really well, right? And that helps working together. Well, okay, I like working with you. You can tell me something different if you want. But honestly, it motivates me, right? I'm not dreading the meetings or anything like that. I'm not dreading doing work. Quite the opposite.
The Neuromatch volunteers tend to be a tight group of friends.
Yeah, I mean, it's people who volunteer their time to make education accessible. So I'm biased, but that's a great group of people that I want to be friends with. But I think that in terms of matching with a professor, I think one thing to consider is, personality, but also just work style. I think some students benefit from much more, hands-on professors, I think we call them, like who are going to kind of check in with them regularly and really be more involved in their research. Some students, that's too much. They just want a professor they can go to occasionally. So I think that's something you just figure out about yourself and about the professor and how to match those styles. To the original question, I think that one of the biggest things graduate students need to learn how to do is learn. So what I mean by that is I think graduate students who are successful take the initiative and know how to learn things they don't know. And that might be like seeking out someone and asking them to teach you. That might be, seeking out papers, reading a book, taking a class, but it's not so kind of a defined curriculum that you take in undergrad or a defined set of classes. You're a little bit more in charge of figuring out what you need to know to do your research. And that's a skill you can, grow on its own. It's, meta learning, but.
Learning how to learn. I think that's a really important thing. So we'll jump to one question later, because I'm still waiting to see if we can make the video work. Here's a question by Ali Ramjo. How do you see the future of the free energy principle / active inference / Bayesian mechanics? Do you think it will continue to grow into eventually becoming a mainstream and widely recognized research area? Who wants to answer Ali's question?
I feel like there's a conflation of many different fields here. I mean,
they're all names of the field that.
If I knew the answer, I would probably make a lot of money.
No, like the way it was phrased, Gunnar, is these are the three things that Carl Freston uses for his model. So I think that's the underlying rationale of the question. The question is how we should think about that. One second. We'll get to your question in a second, Ahmed. So Gunnar, you don't want to stick your. I'll stick my head out if no.
No, I can. So personally, the way I understand the free energy principle, it is a very broad framework that has trouble making specific predictions and therefore can probably never be falsified. Can it be useful to? Can it have useful instantiation of specific models? Potentially, yes. Personally, I have not seen any yet, but I'm not super into that kind of modeling. Bayesian theory, I think, is a normative way of approaching things that's super useful in many different ways, whether that's in medicine in terms of clinics or risk assessment, whether that's in interpreting data, whether that's in looking at statistics, et cetera, et cetera. So this is very broad, of course, but I think it's a very useful aspect. And then there was a third one. Sorry, I missed this now. Was there a third one?
No, just the three names that Carl Freston uses. So let me now totally stick out my head on that, and I said it publicly, also in debates with Carl Freston himself. So I don't think it's something that we should get excited about, and here's why. So at its core, the free energy principle and the other things in that area are not really different from the mainstream setting. Now, like the mainstream setting is that in computational neuroscience and machine learning, in a way, people say this is the problem, this is how we formulate the problem, this is how the optimal solution looks like. Now, there is a duality of that, where you can always say that any control problem you can solve as an equivalent inference problem, and that's been known since the 1950s. So Carl Freston kind of took that part of mainstream computational neuroscience, which has hundreds of professors, maybe thousands of professors broadly working on it, and forked it. He's using his own language for everything. Not like free energy principle or like active inference. Like active inference has been part of mainstream machine learning for a very, very long period of time. So all of these are well-established things. It is unclear if he adds anything to that. He is very popular, not among people that are on the computational side, but mostly among MRI practitioners. And he uses his own set of words for things that the mainstream field has different words for. That is universally a bad idea. And oftentimes, brilliant people try and fork the field. Like another example, Stephen Gosberg. I can give you more names of that. But if someone else starts to run with an idea like that and forks the field and starts using different words, then they become worse at using the knowledge of the entire field. And the field gets worse at using anything that they may or may not discover. Therefore, it kind of silos them, and therefore their research line will eventually die out. And so it's bad for anyone trained in these in these forked areas. It's basically a person. Like if you look at the free energy principle, it's basically Carl Freston and his co-authors. That's more or less how the field looks like. A single person, brilliant or not brilliant, has never any chance against a really, really big field. And therefore, I don't think this will become mainstream, simply because the mainstream exists. The mainstream exists on the same. The mainstream works on the same things, and it's basically a silo. And Neuromatch is about community, and by bringing the community together, we can be stronger than any one member of that. Sorry for the blunt words here. Why don't we go to the next next question? Oh, Ahmed is on screen now. Ahmed, why don't you tell us? And anyone, like we love bringing you on screen. Ahmed, what is your question? We can we hear you, but it's very, very much not loud. It's as if your microphone is like a meter away from you. So hold on. So what we'll do is we'll skip to the next question, and then we'll give Ahmed the chance to get his system working better. So here is here's a question by Luis Fernandez, who asked, there seems to be so many different ways of studying the brain within the field of computational neuroscience, neural modeling, network dynamics, Bayesian statistics, etc. As someone that finds all these interesting, what advice would you give related to the depth versus breadth of the research experience one can acquire throughout an academic career in computational neuroscience?
Ella, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on this a little. I don't have a huge amount to add. I would just say that it can be really overwhelming, like, you know, dynamic modeling, deep learning. There's a lot to learn. You know, give it time and you will. I also think there's more connections than you expect when you start out, and there's more kind of learning one thing helps you learn another, and you make these connections, and a lot of the foundations are the same for different computational topics, for example. So I think that, you know, while it is overwhelming and there's a lot to learn, I think that as you proceed, you see kind of similarities that help make it a little bit less overwhelming.
Yeah, and in a certain way, the way that research works is typically you learn sort of one thing at a time, or maybe a couple things at a time. And then gradually that accumulates to the breadth of knowledge, hopefully, if you don't just do the same thing over and over again. But that's for you to choose, right? So if you are interested, start somewhere. You always need a starting point. And then maybe the next project, you'll do the next thing that you're also interested in, etc. But just to be very clear, despite the fact that we all have, we in terms of like Ella, Conrad, and I all have a pretty broad knowledge in comp neuro, we don't know everything. We're still learning every single day. And like there's many reasons for that. One is because, you know, as has been mentioned multiple times now, this is like very broad field, but also it's not really a field. It's not like you're learning linear algebra or something like that, right? Where there's a sort of like almost finite set of stuff to learn. Like the field is borrowing from all kinds of other fields, right? From all kinds of disciplines. And in fact, very often what happens is that big leaps are met when someone from a different discipline or someone brings in a new way of looking at the brain from a different discipline, right?
And
so
I just want to
importing, for example, the Bayesian framework into neuroscience, that made a big difference, just as a very concrete example.
I just want to second what Gunnar just said about us not knowing everything. I mean, no computational neuroscientist knows all of computational neuroscience well. That's why it's great to collaborate and reach out to other people who fill gaps that you don't have. I mean, you know, I'm the curriculum chair for the Comp Neuro course for Neuromatch, and I learned about optimal control from our optimal control tutorials. Like, I hadn't really encountered optimal control before, and I'm, you know, a Comp Neuro educator. So everyone has gaps in their knowledge, and don't stress if you have them.
There's always one exception to the rule in terms of Peter Dayan.
Does Peter Dayan know everything?
That's my theory. I do believe that Peter Dayan actually knows everything. but I might be wrong about it. No one knows everything. So I want to move on to another to a question by Harman, who asked, many PIs have less maneuverability in taking on international students, given restrictions from grant bodies, visa regulations, etc. Any tips for international students for building a profile with regard to graduate applications?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say have specific advice. I feel like my advice for all students would be the same. At many PhD programs, they don't evaluate international students separately, at least in the US. Again, caveat is this is US based.
Yeah, so let's break down the reasons for that. So in America, they have these things that are called training grants. It's basically money given to PhD students directly or postdocs directly. And then there's research grants. Most of the grants are research grants, but there's, of course, training grants. What does that mean? It means that usually when a professor is hiring someone for a specific research project, they don't care if you're American or if you're international. They care only very slightly, because it's possible that if you get hired generally for a project, that then later there can be a training grant that will pay for you. And therefore, like, basically, you can say on average, an American student comes with like a 30% chance of ending up being free or something. So therefore, if you want, like, because statistically, basically, professors will slightly prefer American students. So that is one effect. But otherwise, like, the bulk of the American research volume comes in through research grants, and for that they can just as well hire foreigners. They are not allowed to hire people on training grants. But this is a relatively small part. It's just, it will slightly count against you. You need to be a slightly better fit that a professor would hire you if you're international. And of course, Canada is probably again a very different story. No, Gunnar, how does being not from Canada affect being hired there?
Unfortunately, quite a bit, and the reason mostly is that as a student you get support from. So first of all, grants are smaller, typically in Canada, which means that professors typically don't pay the full salary of the students directly from the grant, but the universities for students get money from the government, and that money essentially subsidizes the graduate studies. Unfortunately, that money typically does not apply to international graduate students. So for international graduate students, university doesn't get money from the government or less. And that means that a program or the supervisor now has to pay for that portion full out of pocket. Since the grants are smaller than in the US, because that's the way that the system is sort of built, it's harder to do. So practically, it is harder to recruit international students.
Great. I think I will ask Ahmed's question for him. I apologize for the tech prompts. We hear you, but it's not nearly loud enough.
It's like a whisper.
So I'm sorry. I'll be asking your question, but like please be on chat if we need a follow up. Can you host an event gathering experienced people in graduate student studies applications who can give us insights into how to get into top PhD programs and work with top researchers in the field of computational neuroscience? That sounds like a prof dev proposal. Ella, like you have good overview there. Could we produce something like that?
Yeah, I will definitely pass the request along. We are all volunteers, so it depends if we have volunteers who have the bandwidth to organize that. We have various professional development panels. I mean, we do have ones next week on careers in academia. So I'm sure they'll touch on this question. And then I'll pass the request on, but if we can't make it happen, we have an excellent session from last year that's still available via recording that I believe Brad Weibel did, who's an NMA organizer. And I think it was very useful. So I'll ask, but there's other resources as well that we have.
We'll see what we can do. If Neuromatch can't produce what you're looking for, feel free to contact me also personally after Neuromatch. It's one of these things that we can definitely get together a posse of people to like discuss that. And if you think that there's interest there, then we should make that happen. Like I think that's generally the Neuromatch attitude. If there's something that should exist that didn't exist, and there's some people who want to volunteer to make it exist, then we make it exist.
So that might be also a good time to give a plug to the NMA YouTube channel, because we have run these professional development sessions over the last years. And so a lot of interesting material is there. So I'd encourage you all to just browse through. And of course, that can be like any time. That doesn't have to be like right now, anytime after NMA when you're a little bit more relaxed. But there's lots of potentially interesting information for you that we don't necessarily cover this year, but we do, as Ella says, have to record.
And it's also a plug to come volunteer, because the more volunteers we have who want to make things happen, the more we can make happen. I mean, we have an excellent volunteer base, but who have put this whole thing together for you all, but we can always use more.
Cool. So next question is by Giancarlo, who asks, what are some good outside resources to independently learn some of the skills, Python, math, and so forth, that we are learning here?
I'm going to shamelessly plug my materials.
Yeah.
I made a course on math tools for neuroscience.
And it's an amazing course. It's like really awe-inspiring.
Thank you. So those are all released, and I'm working on putting them into a Jupyter book, like our Comp Neuro. So it's all like Khan Academy style videos and then tutorials like we do in Neuromatch. And it covers linear algebra, probability, statistics, machine learning, connected to neuroscience. I feel a bit sheepish for being so shamelessly plugging that. There's many other resources, but I like that one.
It's probably the best resource out there.
Yeah. But let's plug a few more things. Now, like,
Yes.
There are some very nice books in the area, depending on what you're interested in. I want to mention Diane and Abbott's book in Computational Neuroscience. I want to mention the book called Spikes. I want to mention the Bayesian statistics textbook that Weiji, Ma, Dan Goldreich, and myself just finished. What am I missing? There's a lot of like. I want to mention the an information theory book by David Mackay, and another one by Stone. There are nice MOOCs. Ella just the edX course for Python. Yes, absolutely. Python for research. What?
I just put down my wiki page here, has a whole bunch of links to resources all over the place, like from comp neuro to programming, math.
We should link to this from our Neuromatch materials.
It's somewhere, I think, but it's hidden.
That's right. Yes. So there's a question that's directed at me, but I think it should be directed at the whole panel. What was your path towards neuroscience? Were we always neuroscience, or did we do other things? Why don't we start with you, Gunnar? Because I think I know what you're going to tell us. You must always have. You're such a good neuroscientist. You must always have been a neuroscientist.
No. So I started off in physics, and then I did a dual degree in engineering. And then at some point during my physics master's thesis, I guess it was called diploma back then in Europe or in Germany, there was a seminar series, and I sat into a seminar given by a physicist who used chaos theory to try to understand epilepsy. And that just blew my mind, and I decided I wanted to become like this person. Unfortunately, I don't actually remember the name. that was the moment I decided to leave. I was working on like surface and particle physics at that point. Leave physics and go into neuroscience. And since then, I've been working on a whole bunch of different things in neuroscience as well. So it's, there's no. I don't think there's any. Maybe there's a typical way, and I'm not quite sure, but I would say no. Like neuroscience is one of those highly interdisciplinary fields, and I think we hugely benefit from that.
So what about you, Ella? You must have studied education for neuroscience, no?
I did not. No, I kind of serendipitously landed in the education space. But in terms of my original interest in neuroscience, yeah, I went to college wanting to do physics. And I was given a campus tour by someone who was a neuroscience major, and they told me what neuroscience was. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So I started in neuroscience pretty early, though. I dual majored in neuroscience and physics. And I spent the first 3 years of undergrad going, oh, do I want to be a physicist? Do I want to be a neuroscientist? Like, I like thinking about how the brain works, but I also like computational stuff. And then I learned about this field called computational neuroscience, and I was sold. And yeah, in terms of education, again, like it was a benefit of exploring different things in my PhD. I just TA'd a couple classes, guest lectured, helped create a class, and I just realized how much I liked doing it. And that's not something I would have known if I hadn't just tried it out.
Yeah, and for me, equally not straight path. I was a physicist, then I wanted to do molecular biology, then I wanted to do basically electrophysiology, and the physicist didn't like that. And then like I get to move into computational neuroscience. Then I was like more on the cognitive science side, motor control. I've been drifting back and forth through all those fields the whole time. And I think this is what makes the field so much fun. Cool. And like I just wanted to comment, there's a comment by Tuga Yusuf who says they can help translate materials into Arabic. Like, yes, we're always looking for volunteers. So like find us and we do that kind of thing like all the time, and we rely on people going down that route where they join us as volunteers, and they often learn. I feel I learned an awful lot being part of that. Let's see. Should we? I mean, like we've been more than an hour. We should probably wrap this up. What does everyone think? Yeah, let's make this a poll. Create poll. Is this kind of office hour useful? What should be answers? Like, yes, let's have that every few days.
No. And maybe yes, but more focused in scope, like a prof dev panel.
So I'm just scrolling through the questions. A lot of the questions are becoming more specific, which isn't a bad thing, but might be of like fewer interest to all of the audience. What I would recommend or encourage you doing is take those questions back to your pods, talk to your TAs about it, put them into the Discord, ask them there, share them there, and I'm sure you'll get lots of answers, even if we can't answer all of them now.
Cool. What else? I mean, like these were wonderful questions. We hope it's useful. It's a weird format, but it's great for us organizers to kind of directly talk with you. That is why I was in favor of us doing that. And it's nice to like basically get to know you a little through your questions and talk a little with one another. I wanted to wrap up with something fun, which is Ella and Gunnar. Have you recently read a book that you enjoyed that you could recommend to people?
Well, I already sort of did. Like Grace Lindsay's book was just like so fun to read. Like, yeah. The other book that I've been reading lately was Yuri Bujaki's book, The Brain Inside Out. I'm not sure I agree with what he says, but it's definitely very thought-provoking and very well-written book. It is somewhat technical, but I think it's still approachable. But it's the kind of book that I've, like, I read 2 pages and then I find myself like inadvertently stopping reading, and just my brain starts thinking, my mind starts wandering. It's very frustrating in a certain way because, like, I make no progress in that book. I'm not near like nowhere close halfway through or something like that. I'm not sure. But it's a fascinating book, definitely.
Wonderful. What about you, Ella?
Yeah, I mean, my main recommendation was Models of the Mind, so I kind of spoiled that early in the session.
Gunnar scooped you.
Sorry?
Gunnar scooped you.
No, but no.
I brought it up first. He scooped me.
Earlier on, she scooped me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of blanking. Spikes is very good. I know that's also been mentioned.
Spikes is fun.
There's a great book. Oh, there's a great book by Ashley Jovina on So You Want to Be a Neuroscientist. If you're early in your career stage, it lays out a lot of great advice, a lot of questions you've been asking us today. That's all in that book. And she's a wonderful neuroscience teacher who wrote a wonderful book. So check that out.
She's spectacular. I'm gonna like plug a non-neuroscience book because like what we talked about is that in a way we believe that often the interesting opportunities are between fields. I am plugging the book called Plausibility of Life. And so this is a book about modern evolutionary theory, about like which things can make life more plausible or less plausible. And I think the reason why it's important is because there's a big component of neuroscience that deals with how is it possible that we have these amazing brains. And in that space, computational neuroscience touches evolution. And in fact, you can make evolutionary theory quite computationally precise. So I think it's a great inspiration for people who are looking for a part of neuroscience that is not yet mainstream, and that will probably eventually be one.
You also mentioned the Book of Why earlier, which is just a fun, excellent read.
Yes, it's a beautiful read, very readable. So thanks everyone for joining us here. What else? I want to thank, of course, Ella and Gunnar for joining me here at trying this crazy thing. If you have additional ideas on how we can make this be more useful or how important it really is, please feel free to use the chat.